No. Wait. No, that's terrible. I know. Hot take. Dia de los Muertos is being Cinco de Mayo-ed. Spoilers, that is the hottest hot take of this entire video. If that doesn't interest you, see you in a different video, hopefully. But if it does interest you, please let me explain before you start typing comments calling me a fat liberal skank down in the comment section below. Navigating my thoughts and feelings concerning not the actual celebration of Dia de los Muertos, but how certain groups of people have decided to, this year, make money, celebrate festivities, might come across wishy-washy, but bear with me and all will be explained. In this video, we are going to talk about the festivities, how it's being Cinco de Mayo-ed,
cultural appropriation
in this specific context, and my conflicted feelings. ¿Listos? Vámonos. Neta uno, making money. As a capitalist myself, I'm an American woman who grew up with hyper-capitalism. You have no other choice than to be a capitalist. Before you tell me there is a better way, I agree, there is a better way, but as liberal and progressive as we may be, if you are, like I am, an American, we all think about, fantasize, lust after capitalism stuff. The ultimate goal of any American is to win the lottery. Again, no matter how liberal or progressive you may be, we love money and stuff. As my sister always says, we all have a price. Yes, you too. Just don't set yours too low. In theory, I have no real problem with people celebrating Dia de los Muertos because it is good for their bottom line. In praxis, I have only a slight problem with Dia de los Muertos being commercialized. On the one hand, celebrating something just because it will make you money is very insincere and a very bad reason to celebrate something. On the other hand, the more places that celebrate Dia de los Muertos, the more everyone learns about the traditions and their significance. Or if you don't know about them and there's no little card explaining those things to you while you're at the store, but you see something like papel picado, for example, you might be inclined to Google it and learn why papel picado is both beautiful and important to the festivities. Plus, it's the perfect time for little Latin shops, bakeries, tchotchke, and bauble stores to sell their Latin-made food and wares. The celebration can be both a money-making opportunity and an opportunity to learn about a different culture. Also, to see things from a different cultural point of view, especially here in the US, a place that is very death-phobic. It's a good thing to see another perspective on the topic of death. Side note, in the US, we are super death-phobic, and that makes us outliers in the world as a whole. Most cultures, both ancient and modern, are not as death-phobic as we are here. That's probably why Dia de los Muertos is misunderstood and confused as the Latin or Mexican Halloween. But it's not that, at all. Let's get into it. Neta dos, Cinco de Mayo-ed. Dia de los Muertos is confused for Mexican Halloween, much like Cinco de Mayo is confused for Mexican Independence Day. Cinco de Mayo is when Mexico beat the stupid French at the Battle of Puebla. Independence Day in Mexico is the 16th of September. Halloween is a pagan holiday that celebrates scary stuff like ghosts, witches, and monsters. Dia de los Muertos is not so much a celebration of death as it is a celebration of the lives of those we've lost. In the US, since our ultimate god is the almighty dollar, the holiday or celebration we can sell the most stuff for, that's the one that gets all the attention and recognition. Folks here and in Mexico have discovered all the accoutrement associated with Dia de los Muertos. There is so much stuff to buy to celebrate the dead, skulls, cempasúchil, papel picado, makeup to make yourself into a skull, tables, frames, pan de muerto, booze, and other decorations. So many decorations. So pretty. A celebration that is only really celebrated in certain parts of Mexico and Latin America, this year particularly, is being given the Cinco de Mayo treatment. I'll get into who does and doesn't celebrate Dia de los Muertos more specifically in the next section. The fact that I'm going to explain that not everyone in Mexico and Latin America celebrates might surprise you, especially after seeing all the festivities and hearing on the news how Dia de los Muertos is a sacred day in Mexico. To better sell you more stuff, it's being promoted as the special day all of Mexico comes together to celebrate. Yeah, no, not at all. The first time there was ever a Dia de los Muertos parade in Mexico was 2016. Why so recently? Because the 2015 James Bond movie Spectre made up a Dia de los Muertos parade and put it into the cold open of their movie. Money-making folks in Mexico saw how they could make money and do tourism things, so they started the parade for real. Much like Cinco de Mayo is only celebrated for real in Puebla for obvious reasons. That's where the battle was won. It's also celebrated in the touristy places in Mexico as a tourism cash grab. Dia de los Muertos is turning into that as well. It's loudly celebrated in more touristy places as a tourism cash grab as well. Again, I do have respect for making money, but don't act like it's a big cultural event and all Mexicans celebrate Dia de los Muertos. Plus, the celebration that is being presented isn't how it's actually celebrated. Much like Cinco de Mayo is all about wearing a sombrero, sarape, and drinking a lot, Dia de los Muertos is being presented much the same way, where it's a day to sugar skull your face and party. When celebrations that are supposed to be cultural or traditional are reduced to buying things and partying, you're not honoring anyone or anything anymore. You're diluting something unique and special into the most basic bitch thing it could be. A generic, monolithic stereotype. Speaking of, let's talk about who celebrates Dia de los Muertos for real and who just jumps on the bandwagon. Neta 3.
Cultural appropriation.
This might surprise you, actually. I always joke that me doing sugar skull face is
cultural appropriation.
That's because, well, it is. Technically, I can do this and get away with it, but I and a lot of other folks shouldn't do it. Not just those who aren't Mexican or from certain parts of Latin America, but most of us who are Mexican or from certain parts of Latin America. I know, throwing a term like
cultural appropriation
into a discussion makes it seem like I have a political correctness agenda, but I want to talk about appropriation from purely a sociological point of view. Let's see how well I can break this down.
Cultural appropriation
is a social phenomenon. Since the beginning of time, one group of people have had influence on a different group of people. Sometimes the influence is forced, like when one group dominates another group and forces the dominated group to follow the dominant group's traditions, religion, customs, etc. Or, the way we are most familiar with, appropriation is when one group likes what another group is doing, so they just copy fashion, tradition, customs, etc. Appropriation is a phenomena that just happens, consciously or not. The problem with appropriation, well, not the problem, but a problem, is taking something from someone else's culture and using it for cool points or as a fashion statement. There isn't the understanding of why it's done or the cultural significance. It looks cool, so you're doing it. Part of that problem is this meme classic. It's classy if rich white people do it, but trashy if poor non-white people do it. The classic example is that of dreadlocks. When black people do it, they are seen as low class, dirty, and gross. But when white folks do it, aside from cringe, It's high fashion. That is one big issue when it comes to Dia de los Muertos appropriation. The folks who celebrate Dia de los Muertos for real are indigenous folks from certain parts of Mexico and Latin America. I had never heard about Dia de los Muertos until I was in high school, and I heard a kid in one of my classes mention how his family was getting ready to celebrate with the altar and visiting of the graveyard. Outside of certain indigenous communities, Dia de los Muertos isn't really celebrated. Very few folks have those customs and traditions. Why? Because in Mexico and Latin America, the indigenous folks are so marginalized, all of their customs, celebrations, traditions, beliefs are mocked and looked down upon. It's not a good thing to celebrate because those traditions are from the low-class indigenous people. Gross. So most folks don't celebrate events like Dia de los Muertos. Plus, do you really think super Catholic Christian Mexico and Latin America is gonna be open to a celebration that posits the souls of your loved ones come to visit you 2 days a year? If you're an optimistic Christian, you believe your soul is going to heaven. If you're a pessimistic Christian, you believe your soul will most likely be going to hell. If you're somewhere in the middle, your soul will end up in purgatory. With that Christian background in mind, the belief that your soul travels the Mictlan with Xolotzicuntli and back again for a few nights is antithetical to our Christian beliefs. And even a lot of the indigenous folks who have traditional celebrations are themselves pretty Christian too. They celebrate Dia de los Muertos out of tradition and custom. Now, while I agree that people's culture is not fashion, doing skull or sugar skull makeup is not appropriation. Many other cultures do skull face paint as a part of their traditions. Also, admiring and having reverence for death isn't a thing that is exclusive to Mexico and certain parts of Latin America. So go ahead and do the skull or sugar skull makeup. There is no real problem in doing so. Why? In Dia de los Muertos celebrations, the skull and sugar skull makeup serves one of two purposes. One, it's makeup designed to help you appropriate death and welcome your loved ones from beyond. Two, it's makeup designed to make fun of rich people, Calavera Catrina style. La Calavera Catrina was made to parody rich people who looked down on indigenous poor folks who celebrated Dia de los Muertos. Both purposes of the skull sugar skull makeup is as a costume to either appropriate and or make fun of something. So if you want to do the skull sugar skull, go for it. You'd still technically be doing
cultural appropriation,
but you can do it if you dare, even if you are Mexican or from certain parts of Latin America. Which brings me to my other point about Dia de los Muertos appropriation and how it's very complicated. A lot of the traditions are a mix of indigenous customs and Spanish beliefs. It's not strictly an indigenous celebration. It's a celebration that was made to bring together two, more really, cultures together to celebrate and honor the dead. It's already hard to appropriate a celebration that was designed to be inclusive. Also, most of the traditions are from the Aztecs, and as we have established in other videos, the Aztecs were eliminated and a lot of the indigenous folks who were left hated the Aztecs. It's kind of strange how a lot of the tribes that do celebrate Dia de los Muertos use Aztec traditions, right? Well, they mostly don't. Dia de los Muertos is a celebration cobbled together from a lot of other traditions from other tribes and places in the world. Pan de Muerto, salt, sugar, the date, cemeteries, all come from the Spanish. The butterflies, hummingbirds, papel picado, altares are from different tribes. The skulls, Mictlan, Xolotzicuntli, Cempasúchil are from the Aztecs. The tapetes de arena are most likely from either India or the Middle East. It's not really clear. Point is, all of these traditions were put together because our culture was designed that way, to unify, to adapt, to change and evolve. That's why our culture as we know it today has lasted hundreds of years. We have, in a way, appropriated everything and everyone as a way of bringing together cultures and surviving.
Cultural appropriation.
When it comes to Latin people, Mexican specifically is super wild and extremely complex. Technically, most of us who do any kind of Dia de los Muertos celebrations are doing
Cultural appropriation.
I know it's complicated, especially since most of our Latin indigenous cultures have been erased. A lot of us are desperate to cling onto any kind of indigenous tradition and customs we can. We become extremely protective of our culture and don't want it appropriated. I don't think it can be fully and truly appropriated though. Our culture is way too intricate to simplify in terms of appropriation or not. In this specific case, be very careful whomst you accuse of
Cultural appropriation.
because sorry mi familia, you might be doing it too. Final thoughts. Now, does this mean that no one can celebrate Dia de los Muertos or honor their loved ones who've passed on? I'm gonna say you can celebrate it, but only if you do it sincerely. Dia de los Muertos is a beautiful celebration. It's colorful, creative, and positive. I like the concept that you can honor and remember your loved ones with the idea that they can come back to visit us. Death is such a scary and painful thing. To think about it in a beautiful and positive way is very, very comforting. And we kind of need that. This year especially. Because of the pandemic, we have been surrounded by death like never before. So, having a celebration that helps you grieve and accept death as a part of the life cycle is necessary. And Dia de los Muertos is possibly the most beautiful of all death celebrations. I know it was kind of wishy-washy about Dia de los Muertos celebrations. On the one hand, it being commercialized is not good, but I respect the hustle. Having everyone celebrate is a nice way to bring people together, but also is the celebration and tradition being diluted? Possibly. That's the thing about appropriation. There is no line of what is acceptable and okay and what isn't. It's such a complex topic you could constructively argue about for days. Please have constructive criticisms in the comment section down below. Next year, I plan to celebrate Dia de los Muertos for real. Celebrate and honor those who have shuffled off this mortal coil. Remember the fun times, relive the silly moments, reminisce about what made those who have passed on special to us. I'm telling you, it's a beautiful celebration. We have to have more reverence for death because it is the final part of life. If you want the afterlife to be nothing, cool. I hope you get the peace and quiet you so desperately crave. If you need the afterlife to be heaven or the Mictlan, I sincerely hope that's what it turns out to be. Celebrate safely and respectfully. Salud, mi familia.